Mr. Henry Kwek.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise in support of the Act. Let me first declare my interest as advisor to the Federation of Merchant Association, which represents SMEs, especially micro and heartland SMEs. Fighting global warming and environment destruction is humanity's greatest test, and as custodian of Earth, our greatest responsibility. Sad to say, mankind has yet to pass this test or to rise up to our responsibility. I am heartened by Singapore's affirmation of the Paris Accord. I'm even more proud to know that when Singapore signs for international agreement, including the Paris Accord, we have every intention and ability to abide by our commitments. Like many things, unfortunately, Singapore is a price taker in the larger world. With our small carbon footprint, even if we cut emission to zero, the train on global warming has already left. Nevertheless, we have to do our right and fair share, even if it does not tip the global scale, because we are a part of humanity and we share humanity's burden. At the same time, fighting global warming and resource depletion is a grueling marathon, one that will test on the resolve and successive generations. There are real trade-offs impacting real lives today. Therefore, we must be practical in implementing it, focus on the most impactful one instead of the most fashionable. For example, there's much discussion publicly about banning plastic bags or straws, despite Singapore's unique ability to deal with the negative impact. On the other hand, there are many other issues which are even more critical. For example, one of the largest usage of global energy is for heating and air conditioning. And investing in better insulation and airflow design is not just impactful in reducing emissions, but it even pays off financially, factoring in the investment costs. In financial costs, it's net present value positive. And even better so if Singaporeans can think about how to minimize the use of air conditioning. I hope more ground-up support, especially from the public, can be focused on these most impactful ideas to save our environment. Our efforts must be rooted on facts, impact, and practicality. If we overreach, we risk undermining public support from the broader population across successive generations. And it's in this spirit that I would like to share feedback from the ground on how we can judiciously implement the good ideas that we have in this Act. First, the call to recycle large electric and electronic equipment is a good move. These may not be a very large source of waste, but they contain very toxic components. I agree with the government's effort to focus on large sellers, get service providers to provide recycling services, and to provide our businesses with sufficient time to adapt. The definition of larger sellers seems to be focused on larger retailers with more than 300 square meter space, and this is a reasonable definition. However, I would like to clarify whether large B2B sellers who carry a lot of volumes directly to the businesses, even though they don't have much retail space, do they qualify as large retailers? And whether online resellers, large online sellers such as Dell, Lazada, Alibaba, or those e-shops within these platforms, are they included in this? Because it's not fair to put all the burden on the retail sellers. Second, reducing packaging is a good move. However, we must be very careful about how we implement this, or we will see a notable increase in cost of living or reduced consumer choice. One way to ensure careful implementation is to get inputs from international environmental experts as well as major packaging companies, retailers, and logistics players on what's practical, what can be reasonably done. Because sometimes there are real trade-offs involved. For example, many fresh produce that we see in Singapore from Malaysia, they are pre-packed into smaller packs prior to them being sent to Singapore. However, if we take the view that we should reduce packaging and discourage smaller packs from being imported, then we have to do the bulk breaking in Singapore, and given our high cost of labor, they will mean higher costs, which the consumers will end up paying for. And also, for some brands that sell well in Singapore, there's ample scope for us to work with them to reduce packaging. But for smaller brands, it may not be practical for Singapore to ask them to change their packaging just for Singapore. Because if we insist on doing that, we may end up reducing consumer choices. So we have to strike the balance there. And also, while I agree that many consumer products are overpackaged, we have to understand that companies have a natural desire to compete and differentiate. And that brings me to my final point about packaging, which is when consumers speak with their wallets, businesses have no choice but to listen. In fighting packaging waste, one of the strongest possible ways for us to strike the right balance is for the government to support and, if necessary, fund consumer ground-up efforts to change consumer preferences for simple but effective packaging. Third, I'm heartened to hear that we are targeting food waste. As a nation, we waste a tremendous amount of food. I recently met with the VWO, Food from the Heart. Through a fantastic logistic network driven by dedicated staff and volunteers to do outstanding work to bring food to people in need, food that will otherwise be wasted. They have recently decided to do substantive collaboration with Kilman Borough to help our needies, and for that I'm very grateful. And I think that as a nation, our effort to reduce food waste will benefit a lot if we consult food organizations or food waste organizations like Food from the Heart. Lastly, I hope the government can spur effort to look at another area beyond what is mentioned in the bill today, and that is the area of fast fashion. Fast fashion clothing can last for a few mere months, but its impact can be long and destructive. And to compound the challenge, consumers have difficulty gauging the impact of their actions. This is one clear way that our government can work with environmentally conscious citizens. For example, if the government can take the lead to work with other international organizations to help break down the environmental impact, perhaps by materials or by manufacturing process, this will help inform our passionate citizens who can then make a case to the rest of Singaporeans on the importance of moving away from fast fashion. When I visit regions and countries like Japan and Northern Europe, I realize they're very conscious of the negative impact of fast fashion. The key is public education and advocacy, and I hope that on this issue, with some sufficient hard work down the road, we can encourage Singaporeans to buy in and to be more thoughtful. In conclusion, the central focus of the Act of transforming waste into resource is a wise move. It is a manifestation of our national spirit of turning adversity into opportunities. I hope that the three areas that this Act proposes will be the start of many more concrete and practical steps covering more areas. And if we succeed in doing so in Singapore, we will not just live up to our duty as part of humanity, but also over time, what we do in this small part of the world can also influence and inspire similar acts beyond Singapore. With that, I support the Act.